that God has not left himself without a witness in our spirits. There is a spirit in us that contains our spirit, that provides the secondary consolations which float the big anxieties, that sustains the effort beyond the calculated endurance, that makes the case for the good impulse when the rational judgment sends the mind spinning in the opposite way, that brooks over all weariness and all despair until the change comes and the heart is revived, that holds the confidence in the integrity of the self when the deeds that contradict will not be stilled, and the act that destroys goes on its relentless way. It is good to remember that God has not left himself without a witness in our spirits. It is good to remember that God has not left himself without a witness in our lives. There is at work in life much that seems so circumstantial that the release of explanation can come only by the simple word coincidence. Even the most cursory examination of what may be regarded as the most commonplace act shows that at many points startling things have occurred that altered the entire direction of the life. Some chance words heard at a critical moment, some single encounter along the way, a paragraph tucked away in an ordinary book, a stray thought out of nowhere finds a cuddling place in the mind and there begins to live and breathe and reproduce its kind until something emerges as a new look, a different way of thinking. It is good to remember that God has not left himself without a witness in our lives. Despite all the wanderings of our footsteps, despite all the ways by which we have sought to circumvent the truth within us, despite all the weaknesses of our spirits and our minds, despite all the blunders by which we have isolated ourselves from our fellows or proven unworthy of the love and the trust, the confidence by which again and again our faltering lives are surrounded, despite all these things, it is good to remember that God has not left himself without a witness in our spirits. In every life, there are a few special moments that count for more than all the rest, because they meant the taking of a stand, a self-commitment, a decisive choice. It is this that creates the person. It is by this that man reveals his essential humanity. It is the pressing need to find meaning for one's own life to subordinate the whole of one's life to that meaning, it is this need, this inner aspiration, which is from God. All the ideologies, all the doctrines, all the formulae drawn up by men will pass. Every ideal, too, grows old in its turn. Only the true and the living God remains. Thus, the knowing encounter with the living God is the greatest possible human event. The circumstances and forms of the encounter may be infinite in their variety. It always comes, perhaps, as such a surprise that the conviction is inescapable, that it is the doing of God. It is His direct initiative. Cursed on him who relies on man, who depends upon mere human aid, for he is like some desert scrub that never thrives, set in a solitary place in the steppes. But happy is he who relies on God, for he is like a tree planted beside a stream, sending his roots down to the water. He has no fear of scorching heat. His leaves are always green. He goes on bearing fruit when all around him is barren. And he looks out on life with quiet eyes. Jesus and the religious experience. There is something that is always very private and solitary and intimate in the religious experience. And the intimacy is so thoroughgoing and sometimes so all-inclusive in its aloneness that to talk about it seems strangely irreverent. The solitariness of it is inner, and therefore it may take place, it meaning the religious experience may take place in the midst of the multitude, in the midst of the congregation, in the midst of the traffic of life, but always there is this dimension of profound privacy. And it is to the credit of the genius of the religious experience that because of its uniqueness in the life of the particular individual, such an individual does not become full of pride and arrogance. The mood being, thank God I have it. But something deep within the core of the religious experience always pushes against that until the very boundaries of the self melt away. And what at first is one's own private, intimate experience finds its ultimate validity in its universality. And this is the paradox and the miracle. If I were to attempt to put into words in another way what it is that is in my mind and spirit, I would say that the religious experience is the act in which the individual becomes aware of the givenness of God. Aware of the givenness of God. The religious experience does not create this, but it is in the religious experience that the individual becomes aware of the givenness of God, and this awareness is really what is meant by faith. So that faith is the awareness of the givenness of God. And it is this awareness, the consciousness here, that is the religious experience. This means that at many levels of life, the individual may be conscious of this gratuitous expression that is at the heart of life. Sometimes without awareness, without direction, without anticipation is the word, we become aware of some additional meaning, some extra increment, some radiation, some glow that comes over an ordinary experience. At any turn in the road, I may suddenly come upon the burning bush and hear with my inner ear a voice say, "Take off your shoes. This is holy." Therefore, the religious experience is not a creation of the mind. It is not at the behest of the will. There is a grace in it. For it is the manifestation of the givenness of God, the givenness of God in the human spirit. When the religious experience then, as I feel it and think it, when the religious experience becomes an object of thought, so that I begin to reflect upon what I experienced, it is out of that kind of reflection that dogma, theology, creeds, these are inventions of the mind. It is what the mind does with the raw stuff of the awareness of the givenness of God. But in order for religious experience to become an object of thought, it has to become temporarily frozen. It has to be fenced around so that the mind can draw a bead on it. If it's moving too fast, the mind can't deal with it because the mind has to deal with the whole process of structuring things, so that when the mind finally distills out of the religious experience that it has trapped, the mind clings to this with a sense of authority. And that's why the creed, the dogma, the doctrine has in it the profound element of inflexibility, of finality. It is what the mind does with religious experience that was. that was. Meanwhile, the religious experience has kept on experiencing, flowing, new levels of awareness, so that what I think about my religious experience, my belief, my dogma, with reference to my religious experience, must always be just a little out of date. It is what was. And the critical and devastating process is the agony of having to move from the destination that gave so much security to the life to that zone of treacherous quiet when a new pinning down must take place. And perhaps this is why the Master felt that we must, in some real sense, be as fluid as a little child. As vulnerable and as safe. In the religious experience, I recognize that there seems to be, and I move with great caution here because I do not know my way very well. There seems to be a relationship between making ready for the religious experience, preparing the way for the religious experience, all the things that we mean by spiritual exercises, by spiritual disciplines brought into the center of focus as that which seeks to inform the will. That there is an element here that seems to suggest that the religious experience itself is at last contingent upon or rests upon the integrity of the spiritual discipline. And there is something here that when I ready myself by all of the ways that are a part of the grain in my woods, it would seem that when I am inwardly prepared, that he would come and sup with me and I with him. And yet something else keeps working away here. Sometimes I exhaust all of my resources in making ready the stillness, all the things that ready my spirit, and he doesn't come. He doesn't come. And then I spend time trying to excuse him so as to save his face and not embarrass him with my thoughts. And then in the midst of that kind of thinking, it suddenly dawns upon me that God has his own built-in autonomy. He is not at the end of my string, my cry, my despair, my agony, so that if I pull it right, he must move. No, I don't think so, even though Master Eckhart felt so. For he said, if I empty myself of creatureliness, then God automatically must fill me. No, not quite. There is something inscrutable about the mystery. And I'm very glad. Because my little mind and my little soul could not be trusted with that kind of power. So I learned to wait. In season and out of season. With the most exhaustive preparation, the most hurried preparation. He comes when he's ready to come. But I must be ready to receive. The responsibility of his coming is not mine. This is what I'm trying to articulate. The results are not mine. They're his. The Master illustrated this in the parable of the talents. You will remember the man who was going away on a journey, and he knew that he would need his funds recouped when he returned. So he called three of his most prestigious representatives, and he made the announcement. And he said, I'm leaving. I will give you so much money. I'll give you so much money. I'll give you so much money. And when I return, I want you to report. I will need the money. He came back. And then the first man reported, and he said, just to paraphrase it, you gave me $25, here is $37.50. Good, she said. The second man, you gave me $20, here is $22.50. Good. Now, the only man who made a speech was the third man. He said, you know, you have a bad reputation. You reap where you haven't sown, you clip coupons where you haven't invested. I knew this, so I took every precaution. I hid what you gave me where I could watch it every day against the time of your return. And when the word came that you would come back, I brought it. Here it is. And Jesus says that the man was cast into outer darkness, where there is wailing and gnashing of teeth, not because he did not show any increase, no, but he was cast out because he did not work at it. This was his only responsibility. The results, God's. My responsibility, work at it. My responsibility is to ready myself, to become aware of the givenness of God, and so deeply aware of the givenness of God that in that awareness I encounter God. The word had come to the village in which Jesus lived. But John the Baptizer was preaching at the Jordan. And he went. And I wonder what was going through his mind as he took the journey. Why did he go? But he went. And he presented himself to John to be baptized. And it is written in the book that when he came up out of the water after the experience of baptism, the heavens opened, and he, not the disciples, not John, he heard the voice, "Thou art my son, my beloved. In thee I am well pleased." Private, personal, intimate awareness of the givenness of God with such utterness that at the heart of that awareness comes the encounter. In the encounter, I hear in my own tongue, in accordance with the grain in my wood, against my background, with my world of meaning, I hear the voice say, I'm very happy to greet you and to affirm you in the trysting place. Happy is he who relies on God. For he is like a tree planted beside a stream, sending his roots down to the water. He has no fear of scorching heat. His leaves are always green. He goes on bearing fruit when all around him is barren. And he looks out on life with quiet